Have you ever paused to consider what the real cost of silence might be? Not the kind of silence that offers peace and tranquility, but the type that conceals deep emotional scars, buries painful realities, and slowly tears families apart from within. Today, I want to share with you a story that transcends the pages of sacred texts. This is a story about how even the man renowned as being after God's own heart suffered a profound failure in his role as a father. Picture a young, virtuous princess gracefully making her way through the grand halls of the royal palace. The sound of her footsteps echoes softly as she walks toward her half-brother's room, her heart filled with nothing but kindness and untainted innocence. Unbeknownst to her, she is on the verge of encountering a horrifying ordeal that will forever alter the course of her life. And what is perhaps the most jarring and heartbreaking part of this tale? It is the deafening silence from the very person who was meant to shield and protect her from harm. To grasp the full weight of this tragic family story, we must first direct our gaze to Jerusalem, roughly 1,000 years before the birth of Christ. At the city's highest point stood the Grand Royal Palace, the residence of David. This was the home of David, hailed as the greatest king Israel ever had, a man who vanquished giants, led victorious campaigns, and penned psalms that continue to inspire hearts even to this day. However, this particular story is not about his triumphs. Rather, it centers on his most profound defeat. As a father, David had established a truly remarkable empire. Through his military victories, he extended the borders of Israel to an unprecedented extent. His reign brought prosperity, and his name became synonymous with wisdom, fairness, and justice. Yet behind the closed doors of the palace, a complicated and delicate family dynamic was quietly brewing. David had multiple wives and concubines. His large family, composed of sons and daughters from various mothers, a customary practice for kings of that era, naturally gave rise to tensions and rivalries. Among his many children was Amnon, the eldest and presumptive heir to the throne. Then there was Absalom, renowned for his striking beauty and magnetic charisma, along with his sister Tamar, a young princess whose life was on the brink of being shattered by a series of events that her father might have stopped. What makes this story resonate so deeply today is not only the dramatic events it encompasses, but also the enduring lessons it provides about the responsibilities of family leadership. As we delve into the chain of events that culminated in Tamar's tragedy, we uncover behavioral patterns and warning signals that still manifest in families today. How is it possible for a leader to exhibit profound insight in governing a nation, yet remain so oblivious to the perilous dynamics unfolding within his own household? How could a father celebrated for his heartfelt sensitivity in writing psalms remain silent when confronted with the anguish of his own daughter? More crucially, what lessons can we extract from these failings to safeguard our own families? Let us now delve into the events that shattered the peace of David's household, while also identifying three critical warning signs that every parent should recognize to prevent such tragedies in their own families. For while the times may have evolved, the underlying family dynamics that paved the way for disaster remain alarmingly unchanged. This is a tale of power, betrayal, and the far-reaching consequences that follow. But most importantly, it serves as a stark warning about how the silence of those entrusted to protect can become an instrument far more destructive than any act of physical violence. As documented in 2 Samuel 3, David's ascent to the throne was characterized not only by his military triumphs, but also by the steady growth of his family. During his time in Hebron, he had 6 sons with different women, as stated in the scriptures: Amnon by Ahinoam, Kilib by Abigail, Absalom by Marker, Adonijah by Haggith, Shephatiah by Abital, and Ithream by Eglah. Later, after relocating to Jerusalem, his family expanded even further. The environment within the royal palace mirrored the intricate and multifaceted nature of this family structure. Envision the grand stone corridors where siblings and half-siblings were raised side by side, each bearing the significant burden of being a royal offspring, along with the distinct expectations and aspirations imposed by their individual mothers. According to the scriptures in 2 Samuel 13:1, within this complex familial environment, Absalom had a sister named Tamar, noted for her beauty, and Amnon, another of David's sons, developed strong feelings for her. Prior to the impending tragedy that would alter everything, daily life within the palace seemed to proceed with a semblance of normalcy. David allocated his time between the affairs of governing the kingdom and attending to his large and diverse family. The scriptures depict a man who had achieved and acquired nearly all that he had ever desired. His dominion stretched from Dan to Beersheba, 2 Samuel 3:10, a phrase denoting the entirety of Israel's lands. Yet beneath this outward display of wealth and authority, subtle indications of underlying issues started to emerge. The initial sign was embedded within the very structure of the family itself. Given the numerous offspring born to various mothers, feelings of rivalry and jealousy were bound to arise. Every prince maintained his personal retinue, his circle of supporters, and, unsurprisingly, his individual ambitions. Amnon, being the eldest son, occupied a particularly privileged position. The scriptures indicate that he enjoyed unrestricted access to the palace and wielded significant influence. Absalom, on the other hand, was already exhibiting traits that would eventually lead him to rebellion. He possessed charisma, ambition, and an intense sense of personal justice. Amidst them, Tamar resided under protection in accordance with the customary practices for virgins of the royal family. A pivotal figure in this narrative, referenced in 2 Samuel 13:3, is Jonadab, who was both David's nephew and a confidant of Amnon. Characterized as a very shrewd man, he became the catalyst that transformed an already strained situation into an irrevocable tragedy. His role within the court and his proximity to Amnon illustrate how individuals with ill intentions can manipulate and exploit fragile family dynamics. The tragedy is compounded by the fact that all the factors leading to the impending disaster were plainly evident. The segregation of the children into distinct groups, the absence of attentive paternal oversight, and the influence of dubious counselors align with the wisdom in Proverbs 22:3. The prudent see danger and take refuge, but the simple keep going and pay the penalty. David, preoccupied with the affairs of his kingdom and perhaps overly assured by the seeming harmony within his household, failed to perceive the deteriorating relationships among his offspring. The very man who possessed the wisdom to adjudicate the kingdom's most intricate matters was becoming blind to the perilous dynamics unfolding within his own residence. The scriptures instruct in Deuteronomy 6:7 that parents ought to diligently teach their children, discussing these precepts, when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. However, amidst the kingdom's demands and the complexities of his family, David appeared to have overlooked this essential duty. The circumstances were prime for a calamity that would not only devastate the life of an innocent young woman, but also initiate a sequence of events destined to unsettle the entire kingdom. And it all commenced with something seemingly innocuous, a lustful gaze coupled with deceitful advice. The narrative shifts ominously as the scriptures disclose in 2 Samuel 13:2 that Amnon became so obsessed with his sister Tamar that he made himself ill. This was far from being brotherly affection. Instead, it was a twisted and unhealthy obsession that consumed him entirely. As the firstborn son of the king, Amnon was accustomed to having his every desire met. But this time, his fixation was upon something forbidden, his own half-sister. The situation took a darker turn when Jonadab, described in 2 Samuel 13:3 as a very shrewd man, entered the picture. Observing his friend deteriorating, Jonadab inquires, "Why do you, the king's son, look so haggard morning after morning? Won't you tell me?" This seemingly harmless question would serve as the gateway to one of the most sinister and perverse schemes documented in the scriptures. This moment illustrates how manipulative individuals can exploit complicated situations, turning them into irreversible and devastating tragedies. Rather than urging Amnon to let go of his immoral thoughts, Jonadab concocts a diabolical and treacherous plan. He proposes, "Go to bed and pretend to be ill," Jonadab advised. "When your father comes to see you, say to him, 'I would like my sister Tamar to come and give me something to eat.'" In 2 Samuel 13:5, the plan, while deceptively simple, was cruel and calculated in its intent. Exploiting the traditions of the time, which often saw women in the family attending to the ill, Jonadab crafted a trap that appeared perfectly innocent. He was fully aware that neither David nor Tamar would suspect any malicious intent behind the request. Through what appeared to be a simple and innocent plea from a sick brother, the unfolding of the plan unveiled the depth of Amnon's moral corruption. He showed no hesitation in deceiving his father, manipulating his sister, and betraying the trust placed in him by his family. The scriptures in 2 Samuel 13:6 provide insight into how he orchestrated the deception of his illness. So Amnon lay down and pretended to be ill. When the king came to see him, Amnon said to him, "I would like my sister Tamar to come and make some special bread in my sight so I may eat from her hand." To David, their request appeared completely reasonable and natural. After all, who could suspect any malicious intent in a brother's desire for care and attention from his sister? This particular moment in the narrative is especially heartbreaking, as it reveals how a father's unawareness and misplaced trust can unintentionally place his children in harm's way. In his wisdom, the book of Proverbs 27:12 offers this timeless truth. The prudent see danger and take refuge, but the simple keep going and pay the penalty. In this tragic scenario, every single warning sign was blatantly overlooked. Amnon's unhealthy obsession, Jonadab's questionable counsel, and the peculiar nature of Amnon's request for Tamar's care all pointed to impending danger. Amnon's scheme went far beyond the mere pursuit of a forbidden longing. It was a twisted quest for dominance, control, and the desecration of familial bonds. He exploited his privileged role as the eldest son, his father's unwavering trust, and his sister's compassionate nature to orchestrate a scenario that would allow him to fulfill his most sinister desires. As Tamar, pure-hearted and dutiful, walked toward her brother's chambers with the intention of caring for him, no one could have foreseen the terrible events that were about to transpire. As described in Ecclesiastes 7:26, "I find more bitter than death the woman who is a snare, whose heart is a trap and whose hands are chains. The man who pleases God will escape her, but the sinner she will ensnare." The events that follow are documented in 2 Samuel 13 with heartbreaking and vivid detail. When Tamar reaches Amnon's quarters, she discovers her brother waiting there. Feigning illness, he watches as Tamar, with sincere sibling devotion, prepares food before him, exhibiting all the care one might expect from a loving sister. And then his facade collapses. But when she took it to him to eat, he grabbed her and said, "Come to bed with me, my sister." 2 Samuel 13:11. At this harrowing moment, Tamar becomes painfully aware of the trap into which she has fallen. Tamar's instant reaction highlights not only the strength of her character, but also her understanding of the law and her ability to think clearly in a perilous and dire situation. "No, my brother," she pleads. "Don't force me. Such a thing should not be done in Israel. Don't do this wicked thing." Tamar attempts to reason with him, appealing to the law, to basic morality, and to whatever shred of decency might still linger in his heart. In a desperate bid to delay or escape her fate, she even proposes that he seek the king's permission for a more acceptable solution. Yet Amnon, overwhelmed by his obsession, refuses to heed her pleas. And since he was stronger than she, he raped her. 2 Samuel 13:14. The brutality of this act becomes even more profound with what transpires afterward. The scriptures disclose that immediately following the assault, Amnon's so-called love transforms into vehement hatred. Then Amnon hated her with intense hatred. In fact, he hated her more than he had loved her. 2 Samuel 13:15. In a final heartless act, Amnon forces Tamar out, compounding the violence he inflicted with public humiliation. Tamar, devastated, put ashes on her head and tore the ornate robe she was wearing. She put her hands on her head and went away, weeping aloud as she went. 2 Samuel 13:19. Tearing her garments and covering herself with ashes was a culturally significant act, symbolizing profound mourning and the recognition of tragedy during that era. It is at this point that the story reaches its titular moment, the silence of David, which begins when the devastating news finally reaches his ears. The scriptures state, When King David heard all this, he was furious. 2 Samuel 13:21. Yet what happens next is even more telling. Silence. There was no response, no action, no pursuit of justice, and no effort to protect his deeply wronged daughter. Some biblical scholars speculate that David might have been immobilized by his own lingering guilt, haunted by memories of his sin with Bathsheba. Others propose that David wrestled with the conflicting duties of his role as a king and his responsibilities as a father. Regardless of the underlying reasons, the outcome proved to be devastating. A devastated and broken daughter, a criminal left without justice or consequence, and the growing seeds of vengeance taking root deep within the heart of Absalom, the protective brother of Tamar. The silence of David reverberates across the centuries, serving as a powerful and enduring cautionary message to parents everywhere. When individuals in positions of authority and responsibility fail to act against injustice, particularly within their own households, the resulting consequences are both devastating and far-reaching. Tamar lived a desolate woman in her brother Absalom's house, 2 Samuel 13:20. Tamar's life, which once brimmed with promise and potential, was reduced to a bleak existence defined by isolation and unrelenting trauma. The royal palace, which ought to have been a place of safety and sanctuary for her, turned into the backdrop of her darkest nightmare. Meanwhile, the father who was meant to shield and defend her instead became complicit, not by action, but through his haunting and damning silence. This deafening silence not only denied Tamar the justice she so desperately deserved, but it also sowed the seeds for an even more devastating tragedy, as foretold in the timeless truth of Ecclesiastes 8:11. When the sentence for a crime is not quickly carried out, people's hearts are filled with schemes to do wrong. Silence always comes with a cost, and within David's family, that cost would not only be paid, but would accumulate with devastating interest. 2 Samuel 13:22 records that Absalom never said a word to Amnon, either good or bad. He hated Amnon because he had disgraced his sister Tamar. This silence, in contrast to David's passive inaction, was deliberate and strategic, the kind of silence that signals the brewing of a storm. For a full 2 years, Absalom carried the weight of his hatred, carefully tending to it and allowing it to grow stronger with each passing day. The scriptures reveal how Absalom methodically devised his revenge, biding his time and patiently awaiting the ideal moment to act. The biblical narrative emphasizes that 2 years later, as recorded in 2 Samuel 13:23, Absalom finally executed his carefully devised plan. Absalom's scheme was every bit as calculated and shrewd as Amnon's had been, yet it was driven by an entirely different intention. He arranged a sheep-shearing festival, a customary occasion marked by lavish feasts and festivities, as documented in 2 Samuel 13:24. Absalom extended an invitation to all the king's sons, and even included King David himself, fully aware that the king would almost certainly decline to attend. When David showed reluctance about permitting Amnon to join the gathering, Absalom pressed the issue and made a pointed request for his elder brother's attendance. "If not, please let my brother Amnon come with us." 2 Samuel 13:26. Though the request appeared innocent on the surface, it was in truth a covert death sentence for Amnon. During the festivities, when Amnon was in high spirits from drinking wine, 2 Samuel 13:28, Absalom discreetly gave the prearranged signal to his servants. The instructions Absalom issued were unmistakable in their clarity. "When Amnon is in high spirits from wine, and I say to you, strike Amnon down, then kill him." The carefully calculated moment of vengeance had finally arrived. The act of retribution was executed swiftly and with ruthless precision. Overcome with fear for their own lives, the other sons of the king mounted their mules and fled. 2 Samuel 13:29. The initial report that reached David's ears painted a picture far graver than the reality of the situation. Absalom has struck down all the king's sons. Not one of them is left, 2 Samuel 13:30. This moment serves as a reminder of how swiftly bad news can travel, though it is not always conveyed with accuracy. Jonadab, the very same individual who had guided Amnon in his vile scheme, now stepped forward to offer reassurance to the king. My lord should not think that they killed all the princes. Only Amnon is dead. 2 Samuel 13:32. David's response to the news of Amnon's death reveals a father deeply divided between the love he bore for his children and the haunting consequences of his earlier silence. According to the scriptures, the king stood up, tore his clothes, and lay down on the ground. 2 Samuel 13:31. Yet the destructive cycle of violence and silence was far from coming to an end. Absalom escaped to Geshur, where he remained in exile for 3 long years. During this period, as recorded in 2 Samuel 13:39, King David longed to go to Absalom, for he was consoled concerning Amnon's death. Despite the overwhelming weight of tragedy and the pain of fratricide, a father's heart continued to long deeply for his son. This chain of events illustrates how one act of violence inevitably gives rise to another, and how remaining silent in the face of injustice can pave the way for even more catastrophic outcomes. As stated in Galatians 6:7, do not be deceived. God cannot be mocked. A man reaps what he sows. The cost of David's earlier silence after Tamar's assault was now manifesting in compounded and escalating consequences. One daughter left broken, one son murdered, another son in self-imposed exile, and a once proud royal family left in disarray. And still, the repercussions of these events were far from over. To grasp the full scope of this family's devastating tragedy, it is essential to examine the key leadership failings David exhibited in his role as a father. The very man who showed unparalleled bravery in confronting Goliath and remarkable wisdom in leading the nation of Israel faltered during the most crucial moments when his own family desperately required his guidance and support. The first critical error David made was his failure to exercise vigilance. As a seasoned and perceptive leader, David should have been attuned to the warning signs. In 1 Samuel 16:7, we are reminded, the Lord does not look at the things people look at. People look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. Ironically, David, a man chosen by God for his capacity to see beyond surface appearances, failed to discern the sinister motives that were brewing within his own household. The second grave error was his inaction during a moment of crisis, remaining paralyzed when wickedness was inflicted upon Tamar. The scriptures recount that David was furious but did not act. This inaction becomes even more glaring when we consider that, as king, David possessed all the authority needed to deliver swift and fair justice. As Proverbs 21:15 states, when justice is done, it brings joy to the righteous but terror to evildoers. David fell short in his duties both as a father and as the highest authority in the land. The third and possibly most damaging error was David's decision to let the guilt of his past missteps undermine his actions in the present. Many scholars speculate that David's hesitation to punish Amnon stemmed from feelings of unworthiness tied to his own sin with Bathsheba. In 2 Samuel 12:10-11, the prophet Nathan warned David, saying, "The sword will never depart from your house," as a direct consequence of his past transgressions. However, this prophecy was never intended to serve as an excuse for passivity, but rather as a caution meant to heighten David's vigilance. In his role as the head of his family, David exhibited a troubling tendency to shy away from confronting critical conflicts. In 1 Kings 1:6, the scriptures, speaking of another of David's sons, Adonijah, state that his father had never rebuked him by asking, "Why do you behave as you do?" This reflects a troubling pattern of neglect. This recurring failure to address wrongdoing within his household led to devastating and far-reaching consequences for his family. The passive nature of David's leadership allowed a void of authority to emerge, which was soon consumed by cycles of violence and acts of vengeance. Ecclesiastes 8:11 warns us that when the sentence for a crime is not quickly carried out, people's hearts are filled with schemes to do wrong. This highlights the consequences of delayed justice. David's failure to address Amnon's crime effectively handed Absalom the opportunity and justification to take matters of justice into his own hands. One of David's most understated yet profoundly damaging failures was his inability to cultivate an atmosphere within his family where open and secure communication could thrive. After Tamar was violated, She could not find refuge or support in her father as a protector or source of justice. Similarly, when Absalom was harboring thoughts of vengeance, no meaningful conversations occurred that might have prevented the escalation of violence. As stated in Proverbs 29:15, a rod and a reprimand impart wisdom, but a child left undisciplined disgraces its mother. This reinforces the importance of proactive and thoughtful discipline. The lack of consistent and compassionate discipline within David's family created conditions that allowed his children to pursue their own paths, often leading to destructive outcomes. These failures in leadership are not merely historical anecdotes. They serve as critical lessons for today. They stand as relevant, cautionary tales for anyone in roles of authority, particularly within the familial structure. When individuals entrusted with protection and guidance opt for silence or inaction, the consequences of such choices can reverberate through generations. What lessons can be extracted from this ancient familial tragedy, a story that continues to resonate so powerfully in today's world? The insights are deep and critically applicable to modern families, transcending societal status and cultural context. The first vital takeaway is the necessity of maintaining active and attentive vigilance within the family. As emphasized in 1 Peter 5:8, be alert and of sober mind. This serves as a call to vigilance in every aspect of life. In the modern age where children and young people encounter hidden dangers through online interactions and digital networks, such vigilance is even more critical and urgent. This is not about enforcing obsessive control, but rather about cultivating an engaged presence and showing genuine interest in the lives of our children. The warning signs that David overlooked in his time have direct parallels in today's world. These include abrupt changes in a child's behavior, uncharacteristic withdrawal or isolation from others, strained or unusual dynamics within family relationships, and the involvement of friends or advisors who may exert negative or harmful influences. The second essential lesson is the necessity of taking immediate and decisive action in cases of abuse. David's failure to act following Tamar's violation illustrates that choosing not to respond to wrongdoing is, in itself, a form of complicity, as highlighted in James 4:17. If anyone then knows the good they ought to do and doesn't do it, it is sin for them. In modern contexts, this means fostering open lines of communication within the family, setting clear and consistent boundaries, taking immediate action when abuse is suspected, and seeking professional assistance when required. The third critical lesson underscores the importance of breaking patterns of violence within families. The tragedy of David's family unraveled through a series of escalating events, starting with inappropriate desire, advancing to sexual violence, and culminating in silence and eventual lethal revenge. Galatians 6:7-8 reminds us that a man reaps what he sows. For families today, this means recognizing and addressing harmful relational patterns, striving for peaceful resolutions to conflicts, encouraging forgiveness while ensuring justice is served, and cultivating safe spaces for emotional openness. The fourth lesson emphasizes the need for proactive and engaged leadership within the family. Proverbs 22:6 instructs, "Start children off on the way they should go." This guidance demands active presence, meaningful involvement, and the demonstration of a consistent, positive example. In practical application today, this entails actively engaging in your children's lives, exemplifying values through actions rather than words alone, fostering routine opportunities for family bonding, and ensuring your availability during moments of crisis. Lastly, we come to understand the vital importance of breaking the silence that allows harm to persist. Fear, shame, or a preoccupation with maintaining appearances must never outweigh the duty to protect those who are vulnerable. As emphasized in Ephesians 5:11, have nothing to do with the fruitless deeds of darkness, but rather expose them. In today's families, this translates to fostering an environment where challenging truths can be shared openly, building networks of support and protection, seeking external assistance when required, and prioritizing the safety and well-being of the vulnerable above societal appearances. These insights are far more than simple suggestions. They represent principles of life and death, crucial for the well-being and health of any family. As evidenced in Tamar's story, the cost of silence and neglect is often catastrophic, with repercussions that can reverberate through generations. How, then, can we transform these lessons into tangible actions that safeguard and fortify our families? Below are actionable and immediate steps that can be taken to implement these lessons effectively. The first step is to create consistent opportunities for open and honest family discussions. Avoid waiting for issues to surface before establishing spaces where meaningful communication can occur. Follow the guidance of Deuteronomy 6:7, which encourages talking about these matters when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. Secondly, work on creating a comprehensive family safety plan. This involves understanding who your children interact with, both socially and online, setting clear guidelines for internet and social media usage, devising safety passwords for emergencies, and ensuring emergency contact information is always up to date. Thirdly, consider seeking preventive, professional guidance to address potential issues early. Much like we visit doctors for routine health checkups, consulting a family counselor or therapist can help recognize and address challenges before they escalate into crises. Fourth, focus on strengthening familial connections through regular shared meals, group activities, moments of prayer or thoughtful reflection, and celebrating family achievements and milestones together. Finally, it is crucial to remember that while no family is perfect, families that are vigilant and prepared can navigate challenges more effectively. As stated in Proverbs 24:3-4, by wisdom a house is built, and through understanding it is established. Through knowledge, its rooms are filled with rare and beautiful treasures. This highlights the value of wisdom and understanding in building a harmonious home. The narrative of Tamar, Amnon, and David transcends being a mere historical account. It serves as a reflective mirror, highlighting struggles that are still prevalent in families today. The silence that tore apart this royal family continues to pose a tangible danger to modern households. However, unlike Tamar, we are not condemned to bear our burdens of grief and pain in isolation. Unlike David, we are not required to allow past mistakes to hinder our ability to act decisively in the present. And unlike Amnon or Absalom, we are not compelled to permit harmful impulses to dictate the future of our families. As Isaiah 61:3 declares, the Lord promises to bestow on them a crown of beauty instead of ashes, the oil of joy instead of mourning, and a garment of praise instead of a spirit of despair. This divine promise of renewal is accessible to all families who decide to end the cycles of silence and inaction. The decision lies in our hands. We can either follow David's example of silence in the face of wrongdoing, or we can choose to become advocates of change and protectors within our families. The cost of maintaining silence in such situations is far too significant to overlook. It is time to speak up, take meaningful action, and prioritize protection, because breaking the silence is often the crucial first step toward restoring peace and harmony.